So, you know about attachment styles. You've been healing your own. You figured out what your partner's attachment style is. But why do you suddenly feel like you are maybe walking on eggshells around them? Are you right back into your codependent patterns because you see that, let's say, they're dismissive avoidant and you're anxious preoccupied, and you are trying to be careful to sort of accommodate their particular attachment style? Does this mean you've gone backwards? Does this mean you're being codependent again? In this video, I want to talk about how this doesn't have to mean that at all, and how interdependent relationship really is the goal that you're going for. But what does that look like? Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and the mission of this channel is to give you content that helps you have the most fulfilling relationships and live your best life. So, this is something that can happen really easily. It's happened a bit to me where I've pondered it and sort of worked through it. I've definitely had it happen with clients. I've seen it just in other places around people talking about relationships, who may have done tons of personal development work, but here they are at this place where they feel like, or they sound like, if they don't have insight themselves into it, like they are perhaps walking on eggshells around their partner because they've figured out, they've been working on their own attachment style or their own codependency, and they've sort of figured out the patterns in their partner, and so they're trying to be really mindful of that, and they feel like, whoa, what's this internal feeling, or do they sound like they're doing this, that they are maybe deprioritizing themselves again? Are they doing that? Well, sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes you can question it a little. In my case, actually, I questioned it a little bit, but I realized I wasn't. I had changed, and it was completely different in the way I was approaching it. Sometimes with people, they are kind of slipping into codependent patterns with it and sort of using the knowledge that they've gained about attachment styles and the work that they've done to sort of slip in a different way into the codependency or into taking the other person more into account than themselves. So let's get into this. Why does it, I'm going to take the perspective though of why does it not need to look like this? Because we do want the relationship to be interdependent. We do want to take the other person into account. So I want to look at it from the perspective of it doesn't have to be a problem. In fact, it can look very, very healthy. So I'm going to start by talking about some examples of ways this looks, so you can get sort of a concrete sense of how this looks in a relationship, about what the person is doing that is very much taking the other person into account. And then we're going to talk about how that can be in a healthy way and be actually really great, not a problem at all. So what are the aspects of this, of taking the other person into account now that you have done personal development work yourself? Okay, so one thing, I did a recent video on this actually, was that I said, hey, you can receive and focus a bit on receiving from your partner's love language, besides just asking for and having them understand what your love language is. So it was a little spin, right, on understand yourself, make sure you're having your partner understand what your love language is. In that video, I was putting the emphasis kind of more on the other person in terms of creating the healthy relationship. So the idea was, don't neglect that, to try to notice if they're giving something in the way that's more natural to them to express love, because it's the way they receive love and express love, right? And so to try to sort of, it's almost like being gracious and actually receiving what someone's trying to put out there. And so you can see how that could be taken as, oh, well, the emphasis isn't on my love language then, right? But I want us to try to get out of that black and white thinking, that either or, the almost like conflict of us versus them in terms of our needs and wants and who we are. So, but you can see how that's an example of where it looks like that focus is, for that particular piece we're pulling out, that particular thread we're pulling out, the focus seems to be more on the other person in the relationship than yourself. What else is it that goes into this where it might look that way? Acceptance of the other person being different from you. So that's just a broad thing there. If you really are something's happening and you don't like it, and you're mindful of the fact, hey, this is a different person for me. I'm used to things differently, and it's okay that they're different, right? So if you stopped at that, it's okay they're different, seems like it could be a problem, right? But does it have to be a problem? It doesn't, because that is the reality. That's the truth. And you're going to be the most healthy if you're realizing the other person is different from you and you're coming from different backgrounds and perspectives. And then a little more related, like I said, to something like knowing their attachment style. Perhaps often other people aren't necessarily as into personal development as we are, and that's also okay. So if you know that their attachment style, perhaps you're drawing out of them a bit by asking them what their needs are and wants are. And you're trying to facilitate that process of them getting their needs met too. So that could be done in a very unhealthy way where the entire focus is on them. But having any of the focus on them, is that a problem? No. So it could look like that you are very much trying to not only find out and facilitate them expressing their wants and needs, but also following through on them. And then even from the other perspective of your own wants and needs, rather than going into expectations, you're communicating. So you're taking that step of making sure they understand what your wants and needs are. So in a sense, that's understanding of them as the focus when we pull that thread out that way, because we're knowing that they're not going to necessarily automatically understand. They're not going to automatically do it without us, being explicit about it and expressing. So it's that understanding that it's our responsibility to communicate. And then, of course, all of this in terms of the follow through will be about compromising. The fact that it's going to still be about compromising even after, in terms of how it exactly looks, even after you express your own wants and needs, that can sometimes feel like, oh, am I diluting what my wants and needs are? But it doesn't have to be that way either. And I will make one caveat here that I maybe should have said at the very beginning of this video, which is that we are talking about cases where the other partner is engaged in the process. They may be very different from you. There may be a lot of compromise involved, but they are engaged in the relationship and also trying to make things work. So we're not talking about someone who's not, just refusing to engage with you at all or something like that. So we're talking about a relationship that has this potential for growth and for change and for transformation because both parties are involved, even if it looks very different from each end. And I think that's the point too, to reemphasize that it doesn't have to look like personal development work on their end, because different people just are going to be different about that. And the criterion for a relationship isn't that you happen to be someone who either naturally is more interested in personal development work as original fearful avoidance often are, and it doesn't have to be that you happen to come to that through a crisis. Like someone can have a healthy relationship and work through things without having to see it fully through that kind of a lens. And then a final way I'll mention in terms of a thread to pull out that looks like more focus on the other person and sort of like being kind to how they are with things and how things are going with them is in the follow through. So because I often emphasize that here, it's important to know that we have all these patterns and patterns aren't so easy to change. So we can't expect that it's easy for the partner to change either. So there will be times that they forget. There will, what they were supposed, you'd agreed on to do. There will be times that it seems like backtracking. And that's okay, right? As long as the person's engaged and still trying, that is absolutely to be expected because we all have patterns and they are hard to break. It's hard to change. It's hard to change, but very possible at the same time, I should say. So keep the hope there because when you do make the change and you're persistent about it, then it does take, right? We rewire, that's hard to say, we rewire our brains. And so it is possible to do that, but it doesn't happen automatically. It's a process. So that's another way that could look like, oh, we're just like not holding our boundary, right? But that's not true, right? And I'm about to get into why it's not true. So let's switch to that section before I even get into it with that particular example. Okay, so why isn't all of what I just said those examples? Why isn't that taking away from this amazing focus that you put on your own self-understanding, on your healing, and on prioritizing yourself? It's because we're talking about interdependence, right? So interdependence is something that we need for a healthy relationship. It can't be usually people don't take it like this. They aren't taking it like, oh, it's just about me now. But people can start to question it then when it doesn't feel like it's all about themselves because they're like, wait, it's hard to explain this, but if you've experienced it, it's like you finally are sort of realizing where you need to prioritize yourself. So then it's like it becomes almost a little confusing at first just because you're not used to the interdependence. Like, how do I then make it interdependent? How do I bring the other person's things in? Because let's say I was used to be codependent and are only prioritizing them. It can be hard to sort of figure out what that balance is. But a lot of it, as we go on through the next examples, you'll see, a lot of it is because it's about, again, the process. It's about follow through. It's about just expression, communication and keeping that going. So I think that goes a long way to explaining how it does work. But for this point, I want to say that interdependence is how you should think of it. Interdependence. That's what you're striving for. It's not like one, again, it's that, not that mindset like now I'm first. Now they're first. Now I'm first. It's not really like that. I mean, of course, in any individual, something you're compromising about, it could look like taking turns. But in terms of what's being overall prioritized in the relationship, you're both there and you're interdependent. And no eggshells. We're not talking about eggshells with this. I think this is one of the biggest ones too, because if you're sensing that you're tiptoeing around the person, or you're trying to make sure you're not upsetting them, right? You're trying to not upset them because you know what their attachment style is. That's not exactly the same thing as being mindful of their attachment style, both for their own sake, but also for your sake, because knowing that helps you in terms of creating the relationship you want with them. You know, it's like about actually making progress for both of your sakes. If you're noticing it's like about not upsetting them, that's where it would be creeping back into the codependency, but it doesn't have to look like that. So make sure it's not that you're just avoiding conflict or that you feel like you're trying not to make them feel bad. And, you know, the way to also make sure that you're still in there in the mix, perhaps especially for you originally anxious preoccupied people who tend to put focus on someone else and kind of forget themselves completely in the other person often, that would be the work, right? The work would be to make sure, even as you're doing that moment where you're taking what they're saying, you stay mindful of what your own priorities and goals and wants and needs are. So you can be there too. You can both be there at the same time. Don't abandon yourself. And again, so now I'll talk about compromise in the positive way. It's wonderful that it's about compromise. Isn't that what a healthy relationship is? So compromise, turn taking, giving and receiving, that kind of thing is what a healthy relationship is. And that is what the goal with this particular person is. You have your own individual goal about prioritizing yourself in relationships. And then in this particular relationship, it's going to look like the creation of this healthy relationship between that interdependence and both of you showing up and expressing, which leads into another point, which is that it's really about more expression, more communication. And that doesn't have to necessarily mean so many words. You know, if your partner's not a verbal processor or you aren't, it isn't about so much the words as actually bringing the topic up at a time that's, you know, it can be sometimes spontaneous, maybe it's a planned time, but it's about making sure that other person has heard that expression and had that chance for the communication and understanding and vice versa. And then what about that realism about mistakes and backtracking? Well, not only is that realistic, but the key is the persistence, right? So the reason it's not abandoning yourself and what you were trying to do there in the relationship that was prioritizing yourself, perhaps, it's that you're going to still keep working with it. It doesn't mean, oh, there was a mistake, I guess I'll just give up and the person, you know, can't just do it. I'm just going to give up on the idea of what seemed like it was a healthy thing and was going to help my priorities. No, not at all. It's about persistence. So you can be realistic about the actual process and how it looks, you know, day to day, week to week, month to month, but knowing that you still are going to keep working on it. Maybe you'll get back together with your partner and say, hey, is there a different way this could work? Or it's just a matter of reminding them. And can it be even more lighthearted that you're able to not, you know, make it such a big deal? I mean, honestly, then that's probably going to be better if it's possible to do it that way, to keep it more positive, and then they'll have a positive association with the whole process too. And then, of course, the foundation of this is that you will have gotten clear and will continue to keep getting clear and keep knowing yourself and self-reflecting about what you really need and want. And you will accept that, acknowledge it in yourself, because sometimes people don't even acknowledge what their needs are, or they're disregarding their own needs. And if you're accepting and prioritizing that, and you're very much in your power around that you know what it is and it's valid, and you know that, and you understand that, and you have that inner sense of prioritizing it, if you're grounded sort of in that awareness the whole time in the relationship, that's also what leads to the interdependence, that you don't have to lose any footing. You still have that grounding, even if you are lending a hand to your partner in all of these ways that we've talked about. And the follow-through, forever. The follow-through is forever. So that persistence and the follow-through and the continuing on in the relationship, it just keeps going on. So no particular moment also has to feel like you're abandoning yourself, because it's a process and it's going to continue. And it's all in the context. So this is you getting, like I said, so let's just summarize that for a second. It's you then initially and continuing to be clear on what you really want and need and prioritizing yourself, being grounded in that, expressing and communicating about what you really want, following through, and that persistence just continually, and it becomes easier to do it, of course, but it does continue forever. And that's all in the context of this genuine concern and caring for this other person that you love, right? Which is the beautiful piece of that interdependence and why you're in the relationship that is interdependent like this. So hopefully that all made sense to you. Please put any questions in the comments below and let me know if you would like me to cover any other topics, whether it's one related to this and going further with it or anything else.